Hey, tonight we're diving into an amazing historical adventure about the fall of the greatest empire the world had ever known, Rome. Imagine yourself drifting off to a time long ago when mighty armies marched across Europe and magnificent cities sparkled with marble buildings. This is a true story of how a powerful empire slowly came apart, filled with fascinating characters, epic battles, and surprising twists. Perhaps you might like to dim the lights and get comfortable under your blankets as we travel back through time together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the Roman Empire of the late 4th century. The good news is that you're in the most powerful civilization on Earth, controlling lands from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia. Cities connected by amazing roads stretch across the landscape, with aqueducts bringing fresh water and grand buildings showing off Rome's wealth and power. The bad news? Well, things are about to get quite complicated. It's the year 376 AD, and you find yourself standing alongside the mighty Danube River, the northern border of the Roman Empire. The air is crisp with autumn chill, and you can see your breath forming little clouds as you watch an extraordinary sight unfolding before you. Thousands upon thousands of people, men, women, children, and elders, are gathered on the far bank of the river, desperately calling out to the Roman soldiers on your side. Who are they? You ask a Roman guard standing next to you. Goths, he says simply, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Barbarians from beyond our borders. They're begging Emperor Valens to let them cross and settle within the empire. You observe these so-called barbarians more carefully. They don't look particularly fearsome at the moment. In fact, they look frightened. Many are carrying what few possessions they could bring, and children cling to their parents. Their clothes are simpler than Roman fashions, but they're not the wild monsters Roman stories often describe. But why do they want to enter the empire? You wonder aloud. The guard gives you a curious look. Haven't you heard? The Huns have arrived in their lands, terrifying horse warriors from the east. These Goths would rather throw themselves on Roman mercy than face the Huns. You watch as Roman officials meet with Gothic leaders at the river's edge. After some discussion, the Romans appear to reach a decision. The guard nods grimly. Emperor Valens has agreed to let them cross. The men will serve in our armies, and their families can settle here. More soldiers for Rome, and a buffer against the Huns. Clever, don't you think? But you notice he doesn't sound convinced of his own words. Something in his expression suggests worry about what might come next. The next few months confirm his concerns. You travel to a settlement where the Goths have been placed and find conditions are terrible. Roman officials, the people who wear fancy togas and important-looking expressions, are supposed to be providing food and supplies to the newcomers. Instead, they're selling basic necessities at outrageous prices, forcing the Goths to sell their children into slavery just to avoid starvation. This isn't right, you murmur to yourself, watching as a Gothic woman trades her golden earrings, probably a family heirloom, for a small sack of grain. A young Gothic man nearby overhears you. No, it isn't. He agrees in surprisingly good Latin. We came seeking protection, offering our service to Rome. This is how we're treated? His hands clench into fists. There's talk among our people. Some say we should fight back. His words prove prophetic. By 378 AD, just 2 years after crossing the Danube, the mistreated Goths have risen in rebellion. You've made your way to the Eastern Imperial capital of Constantinople, where alarming news spreads through the city. Emperor Valens is marching with a great army to put down the Gothic uprising. In the Grand Palace, you witness advisors urging caution. Wait for your nephew Gratian to arrive with reinforcements from the west, counsels one general. The Goths are more numerous than our scouts first reported. But Valens, with a dismissive wave of his bejeweled hand, rejects this advice. I will not share the glory of victory with my young nephew. These are mere barbarians. They cannot stand against a proper Roman army. Pride comes before a fall, as the saying goes, and you soon hear devastating news from a place called Adrianople, or Hadrianople, one of those ancient cities with slightly different spellings depending on who you ask. On August 9th, 378 AD, Emperor Valens led his army against the Goths, confident of an easy victory. Instead, the Roman forces were overwhelmed. The emperor himself was killed, along with nearly 2/3 of his army. Thousands of trained soldiers lost in a single afternoon. It's a disaster, people cry in the streets of Constantinople. The worst defeat since Cannae during the wars with Hannibal, centuries ago. You understand why everyone is so shocked. The Romans were used to winning battles against so-called barbarians. This wasn't supposed to happen. It would be like seeing a champion boxer knocked out by someone who'd never stepped in a ring before. In the aftermath, you meet a young Roman officer who survived the battle, his arm in a sling, and his eyes haunted by what he witnessed. We underestimated them, he tells you quietly. These weren't disorganized tribesmen. The Gothic cavalry attacked with discipline and coordination, and their leader, Fritigern, he outsmarted our commanders at every turn. What happens now, you ask? He looks at you grimly. Everything has changed. The Goths remain inside our borders, armed and dangerous, and now they know they can defeat us. And he's right. Everything has changed. The new emperor, Theodosius I, eventually makes peace with the Goths in 382 AD, but on terms that would have been unthinkable before Adrianople. The Goths are allowed to settle inside Roman territory as a semi-autonomous group, with their own leaders and laws. It's the beginning of a new pattern. Barbarians living within the empire, but not fully part of it. Over the next few decades, you witness more groups crossing Roman borders, sometimes by force, sometimes by invitation. The empire still appears mighty from the outside, but you can see the subtle changes taking place. More and more, Rome relies on barbarian soldiers to defend its frontiers, even as those same frontiers become increasingly blurred. By the early 5th century, you find yourself in the western half of the empire, which is facing greater challenges than the east. The wealthy eastern provinces centered around Constantinople remain relatively secure, but the west is struggling. You're in Ravenna, a city protected by surrounding marshes, which has become the Western imperial capital instead of Rome itself. The change was made for defensive reasons, a troubling sign of the times. In Ravenna's palace, you observe a powerful Roman general named Stilicho, who is himself half Vandal by birth. Despite his background, he's deeply committed to Rome's defense, serving as guardian to the young emperor Honorius. The situation is deteriorating. Stilicho confides to his advisors when he thinks no one else is listening. We've had to withdraw troops from Britain to defend Italy. The Rhine frontier is thinly guarded, and now I hear the Goths are on the move again, led by a new king named Alaric. This Alaric, you learn, had once served in the Roman military himself. Now he leads his people, the Visigoths, with ambition and cunning. He wants official recognition, land, and payment from the empire. When these demands aren't met, he turns to threats and violence. In 401 and 402 AD, Alaric invades Italy, though Stilicho manages to drive him back. But the empire faces threats from multiple directions. In 405, another Gothic leader, Radagaisus, invades with a large force before being defeated by Stilicho near Florence. Then comes the devastating winter of 406-407 AD. The Rhine River, which normally serves as a natural barrier protecting Roman Gaul, what you might know as France, freezes solid enough for an army to cross, and cross they do. Vandals, Alans, Suevi, and other groups pour across the frozen river on December 31st, 406, breaking through Rome's weakened defenses and ravaging the wealthy provinces beyond. Stilicho, despite his successes, falls victim to court politics. In 408 AD, he's executed on charges of treason, charges that you, having observed his dedication to Rome, know to be false. His death removes the Western Empire's most capable defender at a critical moment. With Stilicho gone, there's little to stop Alaric and his Visigoths. They march into Italy once more, and this time, they set their sights on Rome itself. The Eternal City, once the center of the world, has declined in importance as an administrative capital, but it remains Rome, the symbolic heart of the empire that bears its name. In 410 AD, you stand on the ancient walls of Rome, watching as Gothic warriors surround the city. Inside, citizens are already suffering from hunger due to the Visigothic blockade. The situation is hopeless, an elderly senator tells you, his voice quivering. No relief army is coming. The emperor remains safe in Ravenna, but we have been abandoned. On August 24th, 410 AD, the unthinkable happens. The Salarian Gate is opened, whether by treachery or desperation. Accounts differ, and Alaric's warriors pour into Rome. For 3 days, the city that ruled the world is subjected to plunder and partial destruction. You witness the Goths looting palaces and mansions, carrying away gold, silver, and precious artwork. Yet it's not the total destruction you might have expected. Alaric, having once served Rome, orders his men to respect the churches and those seeking sanctuary within them. Still, fires break out in some districts, and the ancient Senate house burns. As you help a Roman family hide their most treasured possessions, the father whispers in disbelief, "Rome has not been captured by a foreign enemy in almost 800 years. How could this happen in our lifetime?" How indeed. As you watch smoke rising from parts of the Eternal City, you ponder the same question. The mighty Roman Empire still stands. It will continue for decades more in the West and centuries in the East. But something fundamental has changed. The invincibility of Rome, the certainty of its eternal dominance, has been shattered like a clay pot dropped on marble floors. Alaric doesn't stay to rule Rome. After the sacking, he leads his people south, apparently aiming for Africa, Rome's granary, and a wealthy prize. But he never makes it. The great Gothic king dies of illness near Cosenza in southern Italy, and his followers bury him with great treasure in the bed of the temporarily diverted Busento River. Then they return the river to its course, keeping the exact location of the grave a secret forever. The next Gothic king, Alaric's brother-in-law Atholf, leads the Visigoths out of Italy and eventually into southern Gaul, where they establish a kingdom centered on Toulouse. One barbarian group has found a permanent home within what was once exclusively Roman territory. And they are not the last. The Vandals, who crossed the Rhine in 406, make their way through Gaul and into Spain. Led by their king Gaiseric, they establish control over parts of the Iberian Peninsula. But Africa beckons with its wealth, and in 429 AD, Gaiseric leads his people, some 80,000 Vandals and allied Alans, including women and children, across the Strait of Gibraltar. The Roman provinces of North Africa, largely untouched by the barbarian invasions until now, fall one by one to the Vandal advance. In 439 AD, Gaiseric captures Carthage, the greatest city of Roman Africa. The loss is catastrophic for the Western Empire. Africa was its richest remaining territory, providing tax revenue and, crucially, grain shipments to feed Rome itself. As you walk through the Forum of Carthage, now under Vandal control, a Roman merchant explains the significance. Without Africa's grain and taxes, the Western Empire is crippled, he says grimly. The East still has Egypt and its wealth, but what does the West have now? Italy, ravaged by war. Gaul and Spain, overrun by barbarians. Britain, abandoned to its fate. You begin to understand that what you're witnessing isn't just a temporary crisis, but a fundamental transformation of the Roman world. The Western provinces aren't simply experiencing barbarian raids. They're being settled by new peoples who are establishing their own kingdoms on formerly Roman soil. And on the distant eastern frontier, beyond the Mediterranean world, you've come to know a new force is gathering strength. The Huns, under their fearsome leader Attila. They will soon threaten both halves of the Roman Empire, adding further pressure to an already strained system. But that story will have to wait for tomorrow night. For now, let's pause and reflect on what we've learned about the beginning of Rome's fall, how a great civilization found itself gradually transformed by the peoples it once considered uncivilized outsiders. The Roman Empire didn't collapse overnight like a building in an earthquake. Instead, it changed piece by piece, territory by territory, adapting to new realities until it became something its founders would scarcely have recognized. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself standing on those ancient walls of Rome in 410, watching history unfold before your eyes. The end of one era and the beginning of another, all happening in slow motion across decades and centuries. It's now the 440s AD, and you find yourself in the Eastern imperial capital of Constantinople. The city is magnificent, protected by massive walls, adorned with splendid churches and palaces, and bustling with trade from across the known world. The eastern half of the empire remains wealthy and strong, even as the western half struggles with barbarian settlements and lost provinces. In the imperial palace, you observe officials gathered around maps, their faces grave as they discuss troubling reports from the frontier. The Huns, those nomadic warriors from the steppes whose arrival first drove the Goths to seek refuge within the empire decades ago, have united under a formidable new leader. Attila, one official says, almost whispering the name as if afraid to summon its owner. He and his brother Blade have taken control of all the Hunnic tribes. They're demanding more gold than we've ever paid before. Another official, older and wearing the elaborate robes of high office, shakes his head. We've been paying tribute to keep them at peace for years now. But these new demands are impossible. The treasury cannot bear it. You soon learn that the Huns have been Rome's northern neighbors for some time. Previous Eastern emperors established a pattern of paying them annual tribute to prevent raids on Roman territory. It was an uncomfortable arrangement, but it generally kept the peace. Now, under Attila's leadership, the Huns want more, much more. When diplomatic negotiations break down, the consequence is immediate and devastating. In 441 AD, Attila leads his warriors across the Danube and into the Balkans. You travel to the region and witness the aftermath of the Hunnic attacks. Towns and villages lie in ruins, their inhabitants fled or captured. Roman forces seem powerless to stop the swift-moving Hunnic horsemen, who appear suddenly, strike with terrible force, and vanish before a proper defense can be organized. How do they move so quickly? You ask a Roman cavalry officer who survived an encounter with the Huns. Their entire lives are spent on horseback, he explains, still shaken by the experience. They eat, drink, even sleep while riding. And their bows. They can shoot with deadly accuracy at full gallop. We've never faced anything like them. By 443, the Eastern Romans are forced to agree to Attila's demands, tripling the annual tribute to 2,100 pounds of gold and paying a massive sum for past arrears. It's a humiliating concession, but the alternative is continued devastation of the Balkan provinces. In 445, Attila becomes sole ruler of the Hunnic Empire, after his brother Bleda dies under mysterious circumstances. Many whisper that Attila himself was responsible. Now unchallenged, his power reaches its peak. His domain stretches from the Rhine to the Caspian Sea, with numerous Germanic peoples serving as his subjects or allies. Even the mighty Eastern Roman Empire pays him tribute. You've heard many rumors about this fearsome leader, so when you get a chance to join a Roman diplomatic mission to Attila's camp, you seize the opportunity. The journey takes you beyond the Danube, into territories that were once Roman, but now acknowledge Hunnic overlordship. Attila's headquarters surprise you. Unlike the stone-built cities of the Romans, the Hunnic capital consists mainly of wooden structures, the largest and most impressive reserved for Attila himself. It's not primitive, as Romans often describe barbarian settlements, but different, adapted to a people who value mobility over permanence. When Attila finally receives the Roman delegation, you get your first look at the man called the Scourge of God. He's not the giant of legend. In fact, he's rather short and squat, with a broad chest and a large head. His clothes are plain compared to those of his nobles, with little ornamentation except for a distinctive sword at his belt. But his eyes are what capture your attention, intense and watchful, missing nothing. The Roman ambassador presents rich gifts, which Attila accepts with little emotion. He sits on a wooden throne, listening impassively as flowery diplomatic speeches are translated by interpreters. You notice that while he doesn't speak Latin or Greek, he seems to understand much of what is said before the translation. Later, at a feast in the ambassador's honor, you observe Attila closely. While his followers drink from ornate gold and silver cups, many clearly looted from Roman territories, Attila himself uses a simple wooden cup and eats from a wooden plate. He remains sober, while many of his warriors become drunk and boisterous. A Roman diplomat standing nearby notices your interest. "Don't be fooled by his simplicity," he murmurs. "It's calculated." He presents himself as uncorrupted by luxury to his followers, even while he demands gold from Rome. Quite clever, really. The diplomat continues, sharing what he's learned about this mysterious leader. They say he discovered an ancient sword buried in the earth, the weapon of their war god. He claims it gives him the divine right to rule the world. His people believe him a god king. Whether divine or not, Attila is certainly a shrewd politician. You learn that he's using a supposed insult. A Roman official allegedly plotted to assassinate him as pretext for breaking the peace with the Eastern Empire once again. In 447, he launches another massive invasion of the Balkans, defeating a Roman army at the Battle of the Utus River and advancing almost to the walls of Constantinople itself. The eastern capital is saved by its massive defenses. The great Theodosian walls prove too formidable even for Attila's hordes, but the surrounding countryside is devastated, and the Eastern Empire must again sue for peace on even more humiliating terms. In 450 AD, the political landscape shifts. Theodosius II, Emperor of the East, dies after falling from his horse. His successor, Marcian, is made of sterner stuff and refuses to continue paying tribute to the Huns. At the same time, Attila's attention turns westward, toward the struggling western half of the empire. The Western Empire is now led by Emperor Valentinian III, though real power rests with his general Flavius Aetius. Remarkably, Aetius once lived among the Huns as a hostage in his youth, and knows their ways well. He even used Hunnic mercenaries earlier in his career to secure his position in Rome. If anyone can deal with the Hunnic threat, it would be him. Attila finds a convenient pretext for invading the West. Honoria, sister of Emperor Valentinian, sends Attila her ring and a message asking for his help, apparently to escape an unwanted marriage. Attila chooses to interpret this as a proposal and demands half the Western Empire as her dowry. When Valentinian refuses, Attila prepares for war, gathering a massive force that includes not only his Huns, but also contingents from various subject peoples. In early 451 AD, this great army crosses the Rhine and invades Gaul. You travel ahead of the invasion and witness the terror that precedes Attila's advance. Cities are abandoned, their populations fleeing with whatever they can carry. Those who cannot escape pray for deliverance. The Hunnic reputation for brutality has spread far and wide. In this desperate moment, you observe something remarkable. Former enemies uniting against a common threat. In Gaul, Aetius pulls off a diplomatic masterpiece, forming a coalition that includes not only Roman forces, but also Visigoths under King Theodoric Thurs, Alans, Burgundians, Franks, and Saxons. It's an alliance of peoples who were often fighting each other just a short time before. A battle is coming, a clash that may determine the fate of Western Europe. You make your way to the Catalonian Plains, also called the Catalonian Fields, near the city of Troyes in northeastern Gaul. There, in the summer of 451 AD, the two great armies finally meet. The scale of the confrontation is breathtaking. Tens of thousands of warriors face each other across the rolling plains. Attila's forces include his Hunnic horsemen, as well as subject Germanic peoples like the Ostrogoths. Aetius commands his Romano-Germanic coalition, with his own Roman troops forming just one part of the diverse army. The battle begins with skirmishes, as both sides test each other's strength. Then comes a struggle for a ridge that dominates the battlefield. The fighting is fierce, with neither side giving ground easily. King Theodoric of the Visigoths is killed in the melee, but his son rallies his warriors to fight on with even greater determination, seeking vengeance for their fallen leader. By sunset, the field is strewn with the dead and dying. Attila's forces have been pushed back to their wagon circle, where they prepare for a last stand. But Aetius, perhaps wary of what complete victory might mean, would the Visigoths become too powerful if the Hunnic threat is eliminated, does not press the attack as darkness falls. Under cover of night, Attila prepares a funeral pyre of saddles. If his defenses are breached the next day, he plans to throw himself into the flames rather than be captured. But the expected attack never comes. By morning, Aetius has withdrawn some of his forces, leaving Attila a path to retreat. And retreat he does. For the first time, the great conqueror has been stopped. Though not decisively defeated, his aura of invincibility is broken. The West has been saved for now. But Attila is not finished. In 452 AD, he invades Italy itself. You follow the news of his advance with dread, knowing that the Western Empire has committed most of its military strength to the defense of Gaul. Italy lies relatively unprotected. City after city falls to the Hunnic advance. Milan is taken, and Attila sits on the imperial throne there in a calculated insult to Roman authority. As his forces approach Rome, panic spreads through the eternal city. Will Rome suffer a fate worse than the Gothic sack of 410? In this moment of crisis, an unusual embassy leaves Rome to meet with Attila, led not by a general or imperial official, but by Pope Leo I. You join the papal entourage out of curiosity, wondering what a religious leader could possibly offer that might turn back the Hunnic king. The meeting takes place near Mantua, at the river Po. Pope Leo, dignified in his clerical robes, addresses Attila with calm authority. The content of their conversation isn't recorded for posterity, but the result is clear. After the meeting, Attila orders his army to withdraw from Italy. Later legends will claim that Attila saw the apostles, Peter and Paul, floating above the Pope's head, threatening him with divine retribution if he attacked Rome. A more practical explanation might be that Attila's army was suffering from disease and food shortages, and the Eastern Empire was threatening his territories on the Danube. Whatever the reason, Rome is spared. The following year, 453 AD, brings unexpected news. Attila is dead. The circumstances are rather anticlimactic for such a legendary figure. After celebrating his marriage to yet another wife, he had many, he suffers a nosebleed in his sleep and chokes to death on his own blood. Some whisper of poison or assassination, but nothing is proven. You might think Attila's death would bring relief to the Roman world, and in some ways, it does. But it also creates new problems. The Hunnic Empire, held together largely by Attila's force of personality, begins to fragment as his sons fight for succession. Various subject peoples seize the opportunity to rebel, and the map of Central and Eastern Europe is redrawn yet again. For the Western Roman Empire, the consequence is paradoxical. While the Hunnic threat recedes, the empire loses a force that had, in some ways, created stability through fear. Germanic peoples, who had been kept in check by Hunnic power, are now free to pursue their own ambitions, often at Rome's expense. As the dust settles following Attila's death, you find yourself in Ravenna, observing a tense meeting between Emperor Valentinian III and his general Aetius, the man who had saved the empire from the Huns. Despite Aetius's service, Valentinian has grown resentful of his general's power and influence. On September 21st, 454 AD, As Aetius presents a financial report to the emperor, Valentinian suddenly draws his sword and strikes him down. As the general lies dying on the palace floor, one courtier remarks, "You have cut off your right hand with your left." The words prove prophetic. Without Aetius, the Western Empire loses its most capable defender. 6 months later, Valentinian himself is assassinated by 2 of Aetius's former guards, seeking revenge for their commander. The Western imperial throne passes to a succession of short-lived emperors, none with the strength or support to reverse the empire's decline. Real power increasingly rests with military commanders, many of barbarian origin, who place emperors on the throne and remove them at will. In the shadow of these political machinations, you witness a surprising development in North Africa. Gaiseric, king of the Vandals, has built a powerful fleet, something unprecedented for a Germanic people. In 455 AD, just 3 months after Valentinian's assassination, this fleet appears at the mouth of the Tiber River. Rome, still recovering from the Gothic sack of 410, now faces another invasion. With no significant forces to defend it, the city opens its gates to the Vandals. Pope Leo again tries to intercede, as he did with Attila, but with less success. He only manages to secure a promise that the city will not be burned and its inhabitants not slaughtered. For 14 days, the Vandals methodically plunder Rome, stripping it of valuables in a much more thorough operation than the Gothic sack 45 years earlier. They take not only gold and silver, but also copper from roofs, fine furniture, and even the Empress Eudoxia, widow of Valentinian, and her daughters as captives. When they depart, they leave behind a city materially impoverished, but still standing. The term vandalism comes down to us from this event, though historians note that the Vandal sack was actually more disciplined and less destructive than its reputation suggests. Unlike the popular image of mindless destruction, Gaiseric's plunder was calculated and strategic. He took what had value and could be transported. By now, you've witnessed the loss of Britain, much of Gaul and Spain, and North Africa. Italy itself has been invaded multiple times. The Western Empire still exists in name, but its territory has shrunk dramatically, and its authority grows weaker by the year. In 468 AD, both Eastern and Western empires make one last, great effort to reverse their fortunes. The target is Vandal North Africa, still the richest province of the former Western territories, and strategically crucial for control of the Mediterranean. The Eastern Emperor, Leo I, commits vast resources to the campaign, reportedly over 1,100 ships and 100,000 men, though these numbers may be exaggerated. It's the largest naval expedition the Mediterranean has seen in centuries. If successful, it could restore the West's economic foundation and begin a Roman recovery. You secure passage on one of the supply vessels, eager to witness this pivotal moment in history. The massive fleet assembles at Sicily before setting sail for Africa. The Western Emperor, Anthemius, has contributed forces as well, though the bulk of the men and ships come from the wealthier East. Hope runs high among the Roman troops and sailors. Many believe this will be the campaign that turns the tide, that begins the restoration of Roman glory. The Vandals, despite their naval prowess, seem outnumbered and outmatched. But Gaiseric, the Vandal king, now in his 70s, has not survived this long by being easily defeated. As the Roman fleet approaches Cape Bon near Carthage, the Vandals execute a brilliant stratagem. Using fire ships, vessels loaded with combustible materials, and set aflame, They attack with a favorable wind at their backs. Fire spreads rapidly among the tightly packed Roman ships. Panic ensues as sailors and soldiers try to escape the flames. What should have been a decisive Roman victory becomes a catastrophic defeat. The majority of the fleet is destroyed, and with it, the last real hope of reconquering North Africa. You barely escape with your life, clinging to a piece of wreckage until rescued by one of the few Roman ships to survive the disaster. As you're brought aboard, exhausted and half-drowned, you hear sailors muttering that the Western Empire is truly doomed now. One grizzled veteran sums up the situation bluntly. Without Africa, there's no money for soldiers. Without soldiers, there's no empire. It's as simple as that. As you watch the African coast recede in the distance, you reflect on how dramatically the Roman world has changed in just a century. From the arrival of the Goths at the Danube in 376 to the failed African expedition of 468, you've witnessed a great transformation, the slow dismantling of the Western Roman Empire, piece by piece. But the final act of this historical drama is yet to come. The shadow of the empire still lingers over Italy, and the proud name of Rome still adorns the imperial government in Ravenna. For a little while longer, at least, the idea of Rome will persist, even as its substance fades away, like the setting sun over the Mediterranean Sea. It's the year 470 AD, and you find yourself back in Italy, the heartland of the declining Western Empire. The failed expedition against the Vandals has drained what remained of Western Rome's military and financial resources. The empire still exists on parchment and in people's minds, but its actual territory has shrunk dramatically. It controls only Italy and small portions of Gaul and Dalmatia. Even within these areas, imperial authority is increasingly nominal. In Ravenna, the Western imperial capital, you observe a curious political situation. Emperor Anthemius officially rules, but real power rests with his barbarian commander-in-chief, Ricimer. Ricimer is a man of mixed heritage, part Suevi, part Visigoth, who has been the power behind the throne for years, making and unmaking emperors, according to his will. It's an open secret, a Roman official explains to you as you walk through Ravenna's marble-lined streets. Anthemius was appointed by the Eastern Emperor, but he can't rule without Ricimer's support, and the relationship between them is tense. Indeed, the tension soon erupts into open conflict. In 472 AD, Ricimer besieges Anthemius in Rome. After a 5-month siege marked by hunger and suffering among the city's population, Ricimer's forces break through. Anthemius, disguised as a beggar, tries to flee, but is captured and executed. Ricimer places his own candidate, Olybrius, on the imperial throne, but both men die of natural causes within months, leaving a power vacuum in an already fragile state. The pattern repeats itself with the next emperor, Glycerius, who is appointed without Eastern approval and then removed when Julius Nepos arrives from Constantinople with Eastern backing in 474 AD. Nepos forces Glycerius to become a bishop and takes the throne himself. It's like watching children play musical chairs, remarks an aging senator, as you observe the ceremonies installing yet another emperor. Except the music is a funeral dirge for Rome. Behind these imperial puppet shows, real power increasingly shifts to military commanders of barbarian origin and their armies. The Western Empire simply lacks the resources to maintain a purely Roman army. More and more, its defense depends on federated barbarian troops led by their own chieftains. In 475 AD, another such commander makes his move. Orestes, a former secretary of Attila the Hun, who has risen to become master of soldiers, magister militum, in the Western Empire, rebels against Nepos, and drives him from Italy back to Dalmatia. Rather than take the throne himself, Orestes proclaims his young son, Romulus, as emperor. The boy, probably around 12 years old, is mockingly called Augustulus, Little Augustus, by his detractors, a diminutive form that sadly contrasts with the name of Rome's revered first emperor, Augustus. Few could have guessed that this child would be the last to bear the title of Western Roman Emperor. You meet young Romulus at the imperial palace in Ravenna and find him to be a solemn, somewhat bewildered boy, clearly a pawn in his father's political ambitions. He wears the imperial purple and goes through the motions of ceremonial duties, but decisions are made by Orestes. Do you enjoy being emperor? You ask him during a quiet moment, away from court officials. The boy looks at you with sad eyes that seem too old for his face. I do what my father tells me. He says I must be brave like the original Romulus who founded Rome. But I hear the soldiers talking when they think I'm not listening. They say I'll be the last emperor, not the first. His words prove prophetic. In 476 AD, the barbarian troops that form the backbone of the Western army, Heruli, Syrians, and Rugians, demand something new from Orestes. They want permanent settlements in Italy, 1/3 of the land to call their own. It's the same pattern seen in other former Western provinces, where barbarian soldiers have been granted territory in exchange for military service. But Orestes refuses. Italy is different, he insists. It's the heart of the empire, not a frontier province to be parceled out to foreign troops. His refusal triggers a mutiny led by Odoacer, an officer of Syrian birth who has risen through the ranks of the Roman army. You witness the swift collapse of Orestes' position as troops across Italy declare for Odoacer. Orestes flees to Pavia, where he's caught and executed on August 28, 476 AD. Days later, Odoacer's forces enter Ravenna. On September 4th, a date that would later be marked by historians as the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Odoacer confronts young Romulus Augustulus. You manage to slip into the palace with a group of officials and observe this pivotal moment in history. Surprisingly, there's no grand drama, no clash of armies or thunderous proclamations. Instead, Odoacer approaches the boy emperor with an almost gentle demeanor. He explains that Romulus must give up the throne, but promises that no harm will come to him. You're still young, Odoacer tells him. You'll have a comfortable life away from these burdens. The child, looking relieved rather than distressed, removes the imperial regalia, the purple cloak, diadem, and other symbols of an office that has become increasingly meaningless. Odoacer accepts them with a nod. Later, you learn that Romulus has been granted a generous pension of 6,000 gold solidi per year and sent to live in a former imperial villa in Campania, along with his relatives. It's a surprisingly merciful end for a deposed ruler, especially compared to the violent fates of many of his predecessors. What happens next is even more interesting. Instead of proclaiming himself emperor, Odoacer takes a different path. He sends the imperial regalia to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, along with a carefully worded message. Italy, Odoacer suggests, no longer needs its own emperor. He, Odoacer, will rule Italy as king, Rex, while recognizing Zeno as sole emperor of a theoretically reunited Roman Empire. It's a shrewd political maneuver. Odoacer gains legitimacy from Eastern recognition while maintaining his independence in practical terms. Zeno, after some hesitation and failed attempts to restore Nepos, who still claims the Western throne from his exile in Dalmatia, accepts the arrangement. Is the empire truly fallen? You ask a Roman jurist as you watch Odoacer's troops take control of Ravenna's government buildings. He considers the question thoughtfully. In law, no. There is still a Roman emperor in Constantinople. Odoacer rules in his name, but in truth, he gestures at the barbarian soldiers now guarding the former imperial palace. Look around you. Rome has become something else, something new. Whether we call it fallen or transformed depends on one's perspective. Indeed, for many ordinary people in Italy, life continues without dramatic change. Odoacer maintains much of the existing Roman administrative structure. The Senate still meets in Rome. Roman laws still apply. Catholic Christianity remains the dominant religion, though Odoacer himself is an Arian Christian, like many Germanic peoples. You travel through Italy in the early years of Odoacer's reign, and find that the transition has been surprisingly smooth in many areas. In the countryside, large estates, latifundia, still operate as they have for centuries, though some lands have been distributed to Odoacer's followers. In cities, municipal governments continue functioning, though with diminished resources. The biggest change, explains a city councilor in Milan, is that tax revenue no longer flows to support an imperial court and army. Odoacer's needs are simpler, and his army smaller. In some ways, the burden on ordinary people has actually decreased. But if Italy has found a measure of stability under its barbarian king, the situation grows more complex beyond its borders. In Gaul, the Visigothic kingdom continues to expand its territory at the expense of the last Roman enclaves. The Burgundians control the Rhone Valley. Various Frankish groups dominate northern Gaul, with a leader named Clovis beginning to unite them into what will eventually become the Kingdom of France. In North Africa, the Vandal kingdom remains powerful under the aging Gaiseric, who finally dies in 477 after nearly 50 years of rule. Spain is divided between Visigoths, Suevi, and the remaining Roman territory. Britain, abandoned by Roman forces decades earlier, has seen the arrival of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who are gradually establishing their own kingdoms as they push back the Romanized British population. The map of Western Europe has been fundamentally redrawn, the unified imperial system replaced by a patchwork of successor kingdoms, most ruled by Germanic peoples who have adopted varying degrees of Roman culture and institutions. In 480 AD, another link to the old order is severed when Julius Nepos, still claiming to be the legitimate Western emperor from his refuge in Dalmatia, is assassinated by his own retainers. Odoacer uses the opportunity to annex Dalmatia to his kingdom, further expanding his realm. For the next dozen years, Odoacer rules Italy effectively, defending its borders and even conducting successful campaigns against the Rugians to the north. But in Constantinople, a new threat to his position is emerging. The Eastern Emperor Zeno has never been fully comfortable with Odoacer's independent power in Italy. When problems arise with another Germanic group, the Ostrogoths, Zeno sees an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. The Ostrogoths, cousins to the Visigoths, who had sacked Rome in 410, have been settled in the Balkans as Roman Federati, allies. Their leader, Theodoric, was raised as a hostage in Constantinople and has absorbed much of Roman culture and military training. But relations between the Ostrogoths and the Eastern Empire have deteriorated, with Theodoric's people ravaging imperial territories. In 488 AD, Zeno makes Theodoric an offer. If he will lead his people to Italy and overthrow Odoacer, he can rule the peninsula as the emperor's representative. It's a convenient solution for Zeno. Either Theodoric defeats Odoacer, replacing one barbarian king with another who might be more loyal to Constantinople, or the two barbarian forces weaken each other, allowing for potential imperial reassertion later. Theodoric accepts the offer. In the autumn of 488, the entire Ostrogothic nation, warriors, women, children, and the elderly, with all their possessions loaded on wagons, begins the journey from the Balkans to Italy. It's another migration, similar to the Gothic crossing of the Danube over a century earlier, but this time with imperial blessing. You join a Roman diplomatic mission sent to meet Theodoric as his people cross the Julian Alps into northeastern Italy. The Ostrogothic king impresses you with his dignity and cultivation. He speaks fluent Greek and Latin, dresses in a style that blends Roman and Gothic elements, and carries himself with the confidence of a man educated in imperial courts. Tell your master Odoacer that I come by the emperor's command, Theodoric tells your party's leader. Italy should have but one ruler, and the emperor has chosen me. If Odoacer submits, he may yet find mercy. But Odoacer has no intention of surrendering the kingdom he has built. In August 489, he meets Theodoric's forces at the Isonzo River near Aquileia. Despite a valiant effort, Odoacer's army is defeated and forced to retreat. A second battle at Verona ends similarly, with Theodoric victorious. Odoacer falls back to Ravenna, that same swamp-protected city that has sheltered Western emperors during previous invasions. With its strong defenses and access to the sea for supplies, Ravenna can potentially withstand a siege for years. And indeed, that's what unfolds. After some initial maneuvers and skirmishes, including a surprise counterattack by Odoacer that temporarily drives Theodoric back, the conflict settles into a prolonged siege of Ravenna beginning in 490. The stalemate continues for almost 3 years. By early 493, both sides are exhausted. The war has devastated much of northern Italy, and neither ruler can claim a decisive advantage. Finally, with the mediation of the Bishop of Ravenna, Odoacer and Theodoric agree to a compromise. They will rule Italy jointly, sharing power in a form of co-regency. On March 5, 493, Theodoric enters Ravenna peacefully to formalize this agreement. A great feast is prepared to celebrate the new arrangement. You manage to secure an invitation, curious to witness this historic reconciliation. The banquet hall is filled with the elites of both factions, Ostrogothic nobles and Odoacer's followers, along with Roman officials who have worked with both regimes. Theodoric and Odoacer recline at the head table, sharing wine and seemingly cordial conversation. The atmosphere is tense but hopeful. Then, suddenly, Theodoric rises and approaches Odoacer. In a swift, shocking movement, he draws his sword and strikes down his co-ruler. Odoacer's men, having been separated from their weapons before entering the banquet, are quickly overwhelmed. The planned co-regency was a ruse. Theodoric had intended all along to eliminate his rival and rule alone. So perishes every enemy of the Gothic people, Theodoric announces to the stunned assembly. Rome has a new master now. In the days that follow, Odoacer's remaining supporters and family members are hunted down and killed. The brief experiment in power sharing ends in blood, establishing a pattern that will repeat throughout the early medieval period as competing rulers vie for dominance. With Odoacer gone, Theodoric becomes the undisputed ruler of Italy. Though officially governing as the Eastern Emperor's representative, he effectively creates an independent Ostrogothic kingdom with its capital at Ravenna. Theodoric's reign, which will last for 33 years until his death in 526, marks a significant chapter in post-Roman Italy. Unlike some other barbarian rulers, he works diligently to preserve Roman institutions and culture while maintaining his position as a Gothic king. It's a delicate balancing act, being Roman enough to satisfy the native population while remaining Gothic enough to command the loyalty of his warriors. You spend several years observing Theodoric's Italy and find much to admire in his governance. He maintains the Roman Senate and administrative system, employing educated Romans like Cassiodorus and Boethius in high government positions. Roman law continues to apply to the Roman population, while Gothic customary law governs Theodoric's own people. He undertakes building projects, repairs infrastructure, and ensures food supplies for major cities. The purpose of Gothic strength is to protect Roman civilization, Theodoric declares in one public address you attend. It's a statement that captures his vision, using Gothic military power to preserve what he values in Roman culture and institutions. Yet, challenges remain. Like Odoacer and many Gothic leaders, Theodoric is an Arian Christian, while the Roman population follows the Nicene, Catholic Christianity, officially endorsed by both Eastern and Western empires since the Council of Nicaea in 325. This religious difference creates a persistent barrier between the Gothic rulers and their Roman subjects. And, despite Theodoric's pretense of ruling on behalf of the Eastern Emperor, relations with Constantinople remain complicated. The Eastern Empire never fully accepts the legitimacy of Gothic rule in Italy, regarding it as a temporary arrangement at best. As Theodoric consolidates his power in Italy, similar processes unfold across the former Western provinces. Each successor kingdom develops its own approach to blending Germanic leadership with Roman institutions and culture. Some, like the Vandals in Africa, maintain a sharper distinction between conquerors and conquered. Others, like the Visigoths in Spain and southern Gaul, gradually move toward greater integration. In northern Gaul, the Frankish king Clovis takes a significant step that will influence centuries of European history. Unlike other Germanic rulers, who either remain pagan or adopt Arian Christianity, Clovis converts to Nicene Christianity, the faith of his Roman subjects. His baptism around 496 AD establishes an alliance between Frankish military power and the Catholic Church that will shape the development of medieval France. By the early 6th century, the political landscape of Western Europe has stabilized into several major kingdoms. The Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy under Theodoric, the Visigothic kingdom in Spain and southwestern Gaul, the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, the Burgundian kingdom in southeastern Gaul, the expanding Frankish kingdom in northern Gaul, various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in Britain, the Eastern Roman Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, continues to thrive, centered on Constantinople under Emperor Anastasius, 491-518. It rebuilds its financial and military strength after the challenges of the 5th century. The East has survived where the West collapsed, in part because its wealthier provinces remained intact, its capital was more defensible, and it faced less continuous pressure from barbarian migrations. As you travel through this transformed Europe in the early 6th century, you find that while the Western Roman Empire has vanished as a political entity, its legacy remains powerful. Latin continues as the language of administration, law, and religion across most of the former Western provinces. Roman roads still connect cities. Roman architectural styles influence new construction, though on a less grandiose scale. Christianity, Rome's final state religion, continues to spread and gain influence. In many ways, the successor kingdoms present themselves as continuations or restorations of Roman authority rather than its replacement. Their kings issue coins with Roman-style imagery, adopt Roman titles, and patronize scholars who preserve and transmit Roman literary culture. The most visible change is the fragmentation of political authority. The unified administration that once governed from Britain to Egypt has been replaced by multiple competing powers, each controlling a portion of the former empire. Borders are more fluid, travel less secure, trade more limited. For ordinary people, the transition brings mixed changes. In some regions, tax burdens decrease as the elaborate imperial bureaucracy disappears. In others, new forms of exploitation emerge under the new rulers. Urban life declines as cities shrink in size and lose some of their economic and cultural functions. The great public buildings of the Roman era, baths, theaters, arenas, fall into disuse or are repurposed. Yet there's also continuity. Most people continue to farm the same lands, worship in the same churches, and live according to many of the same customary practices as before. The collapse of imperial authority is less a single catastrophic event than a series of adaptations to changing circumstances. One evening in Rome, now under Theodoric's rule, you sit with an elderly senator on a hill overlooking the city. The forum below is growing quiet as the day ends. Many of its buildings are now damaged or repurposed, but it remains recognizably the heart of ancient Rome. I was a young man when Alaric's Goths sacked the city, the senator tells you. I thought it was the end of the world. Then came the Vandals, Attila's threat, emperors rising and falling like autumn leaves. Now we have a Gothic king who speaks Latin, builds churches, and calls himself a Patricius Romanus. The world didn't end. It just became something different. He gestures toward the setting sun, which casts long shadows across the ancient monuments. Rome didn't fall in a day, you know. It transformed, gradually, over generations. And it hasn't truly vanished even now. Look around you. Its laws, its language, its faith continue. The empire may be gone, but Rome lives on. As darkness falls over the eternal city, you reflect on the senator's words. The story of Rome's fall is not simply one of destruction, but of transformation and continuity. The Roman Empire in the West has ceased to exist as a political reality. But the Roman world, its ideas, institutions, and cultural norms, continues to shape the emerging medieval civilization that will follow. The power of Rome extended far beyond its legions and bureaucracy. Even as barbarian kings replace emperors, they find themselves ruling in recognizably Roman ways, adapting rather than abolishing the systems they've inherited. And in Constantinople, the eastern half of the empire continues, preserving much of Roman tradition while evolving to meet new challenges. This complex process of change and continuity will continue for centuries to come. But for now, as you watch the lamps being lit across a Rome that is simultaneously ancient and new, the immediate story of the Western Empire's fall has reached its conclusion. The world of late antiquity gradually gives way to what we now call the early Middle Ages, with different rulers, different challenges, but many persistent echoes of Rome's legacy. Let's transport ourselves to Constantinople in the early 6th century. Unlike Rome, which had been sacked multiple times and lost much of its former glory, Constantinople remains a magnificent imperial capital, protected by massive walls and the natural barrier of the Bosphorus Strait. The city has withstood barbarian threats that overwhelmed the western provinces. You arrive in Constantinople in 527 AD, a momentous year for the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire. The aged Emperor Justin I has just named his nephew Justinian as co-emperor and successor. Within months, Justin dies, leaving Justinian as sole ruler of the still vast eastern territories. As you walk through Constantinople's bustling streets, you're struck by how Roman everything feels. Imperial, officials in traditional robes, public ceremonies following ancient protocols, Latin still used for official purposes, though Greek is increasingly common in daily life. The Eastern Empire doesn't see itself as something new, but as the direct continuation of the Roman legacy, temporarily disconnected from its western territories. In the great palace complex, you observe the new emperor holding court. Justinian is middle-aged, with a serious demeanor and calculating eyes. He's not physically imposing, but radiates intelligence and determination. At his side stands his remarkable wife, Empress Theodora, a woman of humble origins, who has risen to become perhaps the most powerful woman in the empire's history. Make no mistake, an imperial secretary tells you as you watch the proceedings. The empress is no mere consort. She has the emperor's ear and her own network of influence. Some say she's even stronger-willed than Justinian himself. You soon learn that Justinian has ambitious plans. Where previous Eastern emperors largely accepted the loss of the western provinces, viewing them as too costly to reclaim, Justinian dreams of restoration, of reuniting the empire under one ruler, as in the days before Theodosius divided it between his sons in 395. The emperor believes it's his divine mission to restore Roman rule to the west. The secretary continues. He sees the barbarian kingdoms as temporary aberrations, illegal occupiers of Roman territory, and with the Vandal kingdom in Africa weakened by succession disputes and Theodoric's death creating instability in Italy, the moment seems right for reconquest. But before any military campaign begins, another crisis engulfs Constantinople. In January 532 AD, what begins as typical sports rivalry between the blue and green chariot racing factions escalates into a massive urban riot known as the Nika Revolt. For 5 days, the city teeters on the brink of revolution as the mob burns public buildings and proclaims a rival emperor. You witness the chaos from a relatively safe vantage point near the harbor, watching in horror as flames engulf parts of the city center. Justinian, holed up in the palace with his advisors, considers fleeing the capital. In this moment of crisis, it's Empress Theodora who steals her husband's resolve with words that will be remembered for centuries. Royal purple makes a fine burial shroud. In essence, she declares it better to die as emperor than to live as a fugitive. Emboldened, Justinian orders his loyal general Belisarius to put down the revolt with whatever force necessary. The resulting massacre in the Hippodrome leaves tens of thousands dead, but secures Justinian's throne. From the ashes of destruction, Justinian launches an ambitious rebuilding program. The centerpiece is a new cathedral, Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, designed to surpass all previous architectural achievements. You watch in amazement over the next 5 years as this revolutionary building takes shape, its massive dome seemingly floating above the ground with minimal visible support. When completed, in 537 AD, Hagia Sophia stands as the physical embodiment of Justinian's imperial and religious vision, a perfect fusion of Roman engineering, Greek aesthetics, and Christian symbolism. Upon entering the finished cathedral, Justinian reportedly exclaims, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." But grand buildings are only part of Justinian's legacy. Even more significant is his codification of Roman law, the collection, organization, and clarification of centuries of legal precedents and imperial edicts. The resulting corpus juris civilis, body of civil law, will survive as the foundation of legal systems across Europe for more than 1,000 years. The emperor works tirelessly, an official involved in the legal project tells you. He personally reviews sections of the code, participates in debates among the legal scholars, and insists on clarity and consistency. He says that without law, there can be no true civilization. While these domestic projects progress, Justinian turns his attention to his dream of reconquest. The first target is the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, once Rome's granary and still a wealthy territory, despite a century of Vandal rule. In 533 AD, after careful planning and amid favorable circumstances, the Vandal king Gelimer is busy dealing with a rebellion in Sardinia. Justinian dispatches a relatively small expeditionary force of about 15,000 men under his trusted general Belisarius. You secure permission to accompany the fleet as an observer, curious to see whether this ambitious campaign will succeed, where the massive expedition of 468 failed so catastrophically. The Byzantine forces land near Carthage with minimal opposition. Unlike the previous Roman attempt, Belisarius's campaign is marked by careful intelligence gathering, strict discipline, and strategic flexibility. The general maintains friendly relations with the local Roman population and presents his mission as liberation rather than conquest. After 2 decisive battles, at Ad-Decimum and Tricomarum, Belisarius defeats the Vandal forces and captures King Gelimer. By March 534, the entire Vandal kingdom has been incorporated into the empire. The conquest that seemed impossible for generations has been accomplished in less than a year. You witness Belisarius's triumph when he returns to Constantinople with the captured Vandal king and the treasures of Carthage, including, most symbolically, the sacred vessels of Jerusalem's temple, which had been taken by the Romans in 70 AD, brought to Rome, then seized by the Vandals during their sack of the city in 455. Now these holy relics return to imperial possession, seemingly confirming divine favor for Justinian's restoration project. Encouraged by this success, Justinian turns his attention to Italy, where conditions again seem favorable. Theodoric the Great died in 526, and his kingdom has been weakened by succession disputes. His grandson Athalaric succeeded him, but died young, leaving his mother Amalasuntha as regent. When she was murdered in 535 at the instigation of her cousin Theodahad, Justinian had a perfect pretext for intervention. Once again, Belisarius leads a relatively small force, landing in Sicily in 535 and quickly securing the island. He then moves to mainland Italy, capturing Naples and Rome with surprising ease. By December 536, the Byzantine army enters Rome, welcomed by many of its citizens as liberators, restoring legitimate imperial rule. You join the Byzantine forces in Rome, where the mood is initially triumphant. But unlike the swift Vandal campaign, the Gothic War becomes a protracted, devastating conflict. The Ostrogoths rally under a new leader, the capable Totila, and the fighting seesaws across the Italian peninsula for nearly 2 decades. This is not the glorious restoration the emperor promised, laments a Byzantine officer as you huddle in a half-ruined Roman villa outside the contested city of Ravenna. We control cities one day, lose them the next. The countryside is devastated. The population starves. And for what? To change one master for another? Indeed, the prolonged conflict inflicts terrible damage on Italy. Rome itself changes hands multiple times and is at one point almost entirely depopulated. Agricultural production collapses as farms are abandoned or destroyed. Ancient aqueducts, bridges, and public buildings suffer damage that will never be fully repaired. By 552, when the Byzantine general Narses finally defeats the Ostrogoths at the Battle of Taganai, killing Totila in the process, Italy has been so thoroughly ravaged that the reconquest seems Pyrrhic at best. The peninsula is now firmly under imperial control, but it's a shadow of its former self, depopulated and impoverished. The final piece of Justinian's western reconquest comes in 554, when Byzantine forces secure parts of southern Spain from the Visigothic kingdom. With control of Africa, Italy, and portions of Spain, along with islands like Sicily, Sardinia, and the Balearics, Justinian has indeed restored a Mediterranean empire that somewhat resembles the old Roman domain. You return to Constantinople in the later years of Justinian's reign and find the aging emperor still driven by his vision of restoration, but increasingly concerned with religious matters. His attempts to reconcile the empire's various Christian factions have met with limited success, and doctrinal disputes continue to create political divisions, especially in Egypt and Syria. The emperor believes unity of faith is essential for the empire's strength, explains a court theologian as you observe Justinian deep in discussion with bishops and religious scholars. But achieving such unity has proven as difficult as reconquering the West, perhaps more so. In 565 AD, after a remarkably long reign of 38 years, Emperor Justinian dies. His grand project of restoration has achieved significant territorial gains, but at tremendous cost. The treasury is depleted, the army stretched thin, and newly reconquered territories remain unstable. Moreover, new threats are emerging. In Italy, the Germanic Lombards will soon invade the war-weakened peninsula, eventually seizing much of the territory so painfully reconquered by Justinian's generals. In the east, the Persian Sassanid Empire presents a persistent challenge, while from Arabia, a new religion, Islam, will soon emerge to fundamentally alter the Mediterranean world. Within a century of Justinian's death, much of his territorial restoration will be undone. Egypt, Syria, North Africa, and eventually much of Italy will fall beyond imperial control. Yet his legal and architectural legacies will endure far longer than his conquests. During Justinian's reign and the tumultuous period preceding it, you've observed another powerful force preserving Roman traditions while adapting them to new circumstances: the Christian Church. Once a persecuted minority religion, Christianity became Rome's official faith in the 4th century under Emperor Theodosius I. By the time of the empire's collapse in the West, the Church had developed a sophisticated organizational structure that paralleled and often cooperated with imperial administration. As Roman political authority fragmented in the 5th century, bishops often stepped into the vacuum, assuming responsibilities for governance, justice, and public welfare in their cities. The Church preserved Latin literacy, maintained international connections through its hierarchical network, and provided institutional continuity amid political chaos. You witness this process most clearly in Rome itself, where the bishop, now increasingly referred to as the Pope, Papa, or Father, emerges as the city's most influential figure after imperial authority recedes. Pope Leo I, who helped persuade Attila to spare Rome in 452, and Pope Gregory I, 590-604, who strengthens papal administration and missionary activity, exemplify this new leadership. In the successor kingdoms, the relationship between barbarian rulers and the Catholic Church varies. The Franks under Clovis embrace Nicene Christianity, aligning themselves with their Roman subjects and the papacy. The Visigoths and Ostrogoths, as Arians, maintain a certain distance from the Catholic hierarchy, though Theodoric famously practices religious tolerance in Italy. The Vandals in North Africa take a harder line, persecuting Catholics and exiling bishops who resist Arian dominance. Such persecution ends only with Belisarius's reconquest and the restoration of imperial and Catholic authority. Throughout these changes, monasticism emerges as a vital movement, preserving Roman cultural achievements. You visit Monte Cassino, where Benedict of Nursia establishes his monastery around 529, creating a rule for monastic life that balances prayer, manual labor, and intellectual pursuits. In these monastic communities, ancient texts are preserved and copied, classical learning maintained, and a new synthesis of Roman and Christian culture developed. Without the monks, much of ancient wisdom would have perished, a scholarly abbot tells you, as he shows you the monastery's growing library of carefully copied manuscripts. Here we preserve Virgil and Cicero alongside Scripture and the Church Fathers. All knowledge is worthy if it leads to greater understanding of God's creation. This preservation of classical learning takes different forms across the former empire. In Italy and Gaul, monasteries become centers of Latin literary culture. In the Byzantine East, with its stronger urban tradition, education remains more secularized, with schools in Constantinople continuing to teach classical Greek texts alongside Christian ones. The role of Christianity in preserving Roman civilization is complex. While the Church maintains many Roman institutional practices and intellectual traditions, it also transforms them according to Christian priorities. Classical temples become churches. Pagan festivals are repurposed as Christian holy days. Roman administrative districts become ecclesiastical dioceses. By the late 6th century, as you conclude your journey through this transformative period, the Mediterranean world has changed profoundly from the unified Roman Empire of centuries past. Political fragmentation is the new reality, with the Byzantine Empire controlling the eastern Mediterranean and a patchwork of Germanic kingdoms dominating the West. Latin remains the language of law, administration, and religion in the West, while Greek predominates in the East. Christianity provides cultural continuity across political boundaries. though theological divisions between East and West are already becoming apparent. Trade has diminished, but continues along established routes. Urban life has contracted, but survives, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean. Most significantly, the idea of the Roman Empire as the universal political order has been replaced by more complex arrangements of power and authority. The Byzantine emperors still claim universal sovereignty, but control only part of the old imperial territory. The Germanic kings rule as independent monarchs, but often acknowledge a theoretical imperial preeminence. The Church, particularly the papacy, increasingly asserts a spiritual authority that transcends secular boundaries. In this new world, different regions follow divergent paths. The Byzantine East maintains more direct continuity with Roman imperial traditions, preserving a sophisticated, urban civilization with centralized administration and substantial commercial activity. North Africa, once reconquered by Justinian, will soon face the dramatically new influence of Arab Islamic conquest. Italy, devastated by the Gothic War and subsequently invaded by the Lombards, experiences greater disruption, but preserves significant elements of Roman culture, especially in the Church. Gaul, under Frankish rule, develops a hybrid civilization combining Roman institutional elements with Germanic political practices. Spain's Visigothic kingdom achieves a notable synthesis of Roman and Germanic traditions before facing Islamic conquest in the early 8th century. Britain, abandoned by Roman forces in the early 5th century and gradually settled by Anglo-Saxons, retains fewer direct Roman influences, though Christianity will eventually reconnect it to the broader post-Roman world. Your journey through the fall of Rome and its aftermath has shown you that this was not simply a story of decline and catastrophe, but rather one of transformation, adaptation, and continuity amid change. The world that emerged from the collapse of Roman political authority in the West was not a dark age of ignorance and barbarism, as later writers would sometimes portray it, but rather a complex reorganization of society that preserved much while innovating in response to new conditions. As you visit Rome one last time, now a Byzantine outpost, much diminished from its imperial glory, but still revered as an apostolic see and repository of ancient monuments, you reflect on the lessons of this historical transition. The Colosseum, once a venue for gladiatorial combat, now stands silent. The Forum, formerly the heart of global governance, is gradually being transformed by natural processes and human repurposing. The Pantheon, a temple to all the gods, has become a Christian church. Yet looking beyond these physical changes, you recognize that Rome's most enduring legacy lies not in buildings or boundaries, but in ideas and institutions. Roman law, as codified by Justinian, will influence legal systems for millennia. Roman administrative practices, adapted by the Church and the successor kingdoms, provide frameworks for governance across Europe. Roman architectural and engineering techniques continue to shape the built environment. Roman literary culture, preserved in monastic libraries, will eventually fuel the Renaissance's rediscovery of classical learning. Most importantly, the very concept of Rome as the embodiment of civilization, order, and universal authority persists long after the political reality it once represented has disappeared. For centuries to come, rulers as diverse as Charlemagne, Otto the Great, and the Byzantine emperors will claim the mantle of Rome, seeking legitimacy in its ancient prestige. In the early medieval imagination, Rome never truly falls. It transforms, sleeps, or transfers its authority to new hands. The idea of the eternal city and the universal empire it once ruled remains a powerful inspiration and aspiration, influencing politics, religion, and culture long after the last Western emperor surrendered his insignia to Odoacer. As you prepare to conclude your journey through this pivotal period of history, you recall the words of that elderly Roman senator who told you that Rome didn't fall in a day. Indeed, what you've witnessed is not so much a fall as a gradual metamorphosis. The classical world slowly becoming medieval, with Roman elements recombined with Germanic, Christian, and Byzantine influences to create the foundations of European civilization. The sun sets over the 7 hills of Rome, casting long shadows across ancient monuments and newer Christian churches. In the gathering darkness, you can almost see the ghostly outlines of the different Romes that have existed on this site. The Republic of Cicero, the Empire of Augustus, the Christian capital of Constantine, the Gothic kingdom of Theodoric, the Byzantine duchy after Justinian's reconquest. All these iterations of Rome have contributed to the complex legacy that will shape the centuries to come. As stars appear in the twilight sky, you realize that while empires may rise and fall, their influence endures in ways both obvious and subtle. The story of Rome's transformation reminds us that historical change is rarely simple or absolute. Old patterns persist, even as new ones emerge, creating a rich tapestry of continuity and innovation that defies easy categorization. Imagine we're sitting in a beautiful garden in 6th century Ravenna, that marshy city that served as the Western imperial capital, and later as Theodoric's Ostrogothic court. It's evening, and lanterns illuminate mosaics depicting emperors, Christ, and saints in glittering gold and rich colors. These images represent the blending of Roman imperial tradition with Christian faith and Germanic rule that characterizes this transitional era. As we admire these artistic treasures, let's consider a fundamental question. Why did the Western Roman Empire fall? Historians have debated this question for centuries, offering numerous explanations ranging from moral decay and Christianity to lead poisoning and climate change. But based on our journey through this period, following historian Peter Heather's careful analysis, we can identify several interconnected factors that help explain this monumental transformation. First, and most fundamentally, the Roman Empire faced increasing external pressure from peoples beyond its borders. These barbarian groups, the Goths, Vandals, Huns, and others, were not simply mindless hordes bent on destruction, as Roman writers often portrayed them. Rather, they were complex societies with their own cultures, political structures, and motivations. Importantly, these societies had been transformed by centuries of contact with Rome itself. Roman trade, diplomacy, and military activity beyond the frontiers had gradually increased the sophistication and organization of neighboring peoples. Germanic tribal confederations grew larger and more cohesive, partly in response to Roman influence and pressure. By the 4th century, groups like the Goths had developed more stable leadership structures and military capabilities that made them more formidable adversaries than the scattered tribes Rome had faced in earlier centuries. Rome created its own nemesis, an elderly Gothic warrior once told you during your travels. By teaching us Roman ways, by trading with us, By playing one tribe against another, the empire made us stronger, more united, more Roman in our thinking. We learned to act as larger groups, to plan campaigns, to use Roman tactics against Rome itself. This observation aligns with what we witnessed throughout our journey. Barbarian leaders like Alaric, Gaiseric, and Theodoric, who understood Roman politics and military strategies, who spoke Latin, and who often wanted not to destroy Rome, but to secure a place within its system. They were, in many ways, products of Rome's own success in spreading its influence beyond its formal boundaries. The catalyst that turned these increasingly sophisticated neighbors into an existential threat was the arrival of the Huns from the Central Asian steppes in the late 4th century. As we saw at the beginning of our story, it was Hunnic pressure that drove Gothic refugees to the Danube in 376, setting in motion the chain of events that led to the disaster at Adrianople. The Hunnic Empire, under Attila, represented a new kind of threat, a military force capable of projecting power across vast distances, putting pressure on multiple frontier regions simultaneously, and disrupting the careful balance Rome had maintained with its Germanic neighbors. Even after Attila's death and the collapse of Hunnic power, the demographic changes and population movements they had triggered could not be reversed. But external pressure alone doesn't explain Rome's fall. After all, the empire had faced and overcome serious external threats in previous centuries. What had changed was Rome's capacity to respond effectively to these challenges. The Roman military system had evolved significantly from the citizen legions of the Republic to the professional army of the early empire, and finally to the frontier forces and mobile field armies of the late empire. These later armies increasingly relied on recruitment of barbarian soldiers, either as individuals or as entire units, foederati, serving under their own leaders. This system provided necessary manpower, but also created potential vulnerabilities when these troops' loyalties were divided. We don't have enough Roman recruits to fill the legions. A recruitment officer in Gaul had explained to you. The old military traditions have faded. Wealthy families buy exemptions for their sons. Provincial landowners hide potential recruits to keep them working the fields. So we turn to the barbarians. They make good soldiers, and serving in the Roman army offers them opportunities they couldn't find at home. This dependence on barbarian troops became particularly problematic as the empire's financial resources diminished. The loss of wealthy provinces to barbarian control, particularly North Africa, to the Vandals in 439, deprived the Western Empire of crucial tax revenue needed to maintain its military forces. This created a downward spiral. Reduced resources led to military weakness, which led to further territorial losses, which further reduced resources. Political instability compounded these challenges. The Western Empire experienced frequent usurpations, civil wars, and assassinations throughout the 5th century. These internal conflicts often took precedence over external threats, with rival Roman factions sometimes even allying with barbarian groups against their domestic enemies. We witnessed a prime example of this self-destructive tendency when Emperor Valentinian III assassinated his capable general Aetius in 454, removing the Western Empire's most effective military leader just a year after Attila's death had relieved the Hunnic pressure. Valentinian's own assassination, 6 months later, plunged the empire into another succession crisis, further weakening its ability to address barbarian incursions. The Eastern Empire, centered on Constantinople, faced many of the same pressures, but survived and evolved into what we now call the Byzantine Empire. Several factors explain this divergence. The East had greater financial resources, more defensible geography, particularly Constantinople itself, and experienced somewhat less continuous barbarian pressure than the West. It also benefited from more stable imperial succession and maintained more effective control of its military forces. As we've seen throughout our journey, the fall of Rome was not a single event, but a complex process extending over more than a century. It involved not just military defeat, but also political accommodation, cultural exchange, and gradual institutional transformation. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced direct imperial rule in the West were not purely foreign impositions, but hybrid creations that combined Germanic leadership with Roman administrative practices, law, and culture. This brings us to another important insight. Many aspects of Roman civilization outlasted the political structure of the empire itself. Latin remained the language of administration, education, and religion throughout the former Western provinces. Roman law continued to influence legal systems across Europe. The Catholic Church preserved and adapted Roman organizational structures. Roman architectural and engineering techniques remained in use, though often on a reduced scale. Even the very idea of the Roman Empire as a universal, civilizing power persisted long after the reality it represented had changed beyond recognition. For centuries, rulers from Charlemagne to the Byzantine emperors would claim to be the true heirs of Rome, seeking legitimacy in its ancient prestige. During our journey, we've also observed how Christianity's rise intersected with Rome's transformation. The empire's adoption of Christianity as its official religion under Emperor Theodosius III in the late 4th century came just as barbarian pressures were intensifying. This timing has led some observers to blame Christianity for weakening Rome's traditional martial virtues or diverting resources from military to religious purposes. However, the relationship between Christianity and Rome's fall is far more complex. The new faith actually provided institutional continuity during political disruption, with bishops often assuming civic leadership roles as imperial authority receded. Monasteries preserved classical learning while developing new educational traditions. The Church's hierarchical structure, modeled partly on imperial administration, maintained connections across increasingly fragmented political boundaries. The empire hasn't truly fallen, a bishop in Gaul told you during your travels. It has been baptized. Christ now reigns where Caesar once ruled, and his kingdom shall have no end. Such a view represents one perspective on Rome's transformation, seeing it not as a catastrophic collapse, but as a providential transition to a new Christian order. This interpretation would gain influence throughout the Middle Ages, as ecclesiastical writers incorporated Rome's story into a broader narrative of divine providence guiding human history. For the common people living through these changes, the experience varied greatly depending on location, social status, and timing. In some regions, like Britain, Roman authority disappeared relatively abruptly, bringing significant cultural and material changes. In others, like southern Gaul or Italy, continuity was more evident, with Roman elites often maintaining their positions under new Germanic kings. Urban life generally declined, with cities shrinking in size and losing some of their civic functions. Trade networks contracted, though they never disappeared entirely. Literacy became less widespread, but continued among ecclesiastical and administrative elites. Monumental building projects became rarer, with resources directed more toward churches than secular structures. Yet amid these changes, ordinary life went on. Farmers still worked their fields, though perhaps paying taxes to a Gothic king rather than a Roman emperor. Artisans still practiced their crafts, though markets might be more localized. Children were still born. People married, grew old, and died. The fundamental rhythms of human existence continuing regardless of who claimed sovereignty. My grandfather served in the imperial administration. My father advised the Visigothic court. And now I assist the bishop. A Roman aristocrat in southern Gaul explained to you. The rulers change, but we adapt. We preserve what's valuable from the past while finding our place in the present. This pragmatic approach characterized how many Romans navigated the empire's transformation. Rather than futile resistance to inevitable change, they found ways to maintain their cultural identity and social position within new political frameworks. Roman senators served in Theodoric's government. Roman lawyers helped codify laws for Visigothic kings. Roman bishops blessed Frankish rulers. Looking back across the centuries, we can see that the fall of Rome represents not an ending, but a transition. Complex, uneven, sometimes violent, but also creative and adaptive. The classical world didn't simply vanish. It gradually metamorphosed into the medieval world, carrying forward many elements while recombining them in new patterns. The legacy of Rome proved remarkably durable, precisely because it was adaptable. Roman ideas about law, government, architecture, literature, and religion could be adopted and modified by peoples who had never been subject to Roman rule. The empire's physical reach had limits, but its cultural influence extended far beyond its borders and long past its political existence. In this way, Rome achieved a kind of immortality, not as a continuous political entity, but as a cultural template and point of reference. For more than 1,000 years after the last Western emperor surrendered his insignia to Odoacer, European rulers would still look to Rome for models and legitimacy. Renaissance humanists would rediscover classical texts with excitement and reverence. Modern nation-states would adopt Roman symbols and architectural styles for their government buildings. Even today, words derived from Latin fill our vocabulary. Legal concepts developed in Roman courts inform our justice systems. The memory of Rome continues to shape how we think about empire, civilization, and historical change. This brings us to perhaps the most important question we can consider as we conclude our journey. What can we learn from Rome's fall that might be relevant to our own time? First, we might reflect on how civilizations typically don't collapse suddenly or completely. Even after devastating military defeats and loss of territory, the idea of Rome survived and evolved. Cultural influence often outlasts political control, and societies have remarkable capacity for adaptation and reconstruction. What appears to be decline, from one perspective, might represent transformation and renewal from another. Second, Rome's experience reminds us that no system, however successful or long-lasting, is immune to change. For centuries, Rome seemed permanent. the eternal city at the center of a seemingly invincible empire. Yet a combination of external pressures and internal weaknesses gradually transformed it into something its founders would scarcely have recognized. Success itself can create new challenges, as Rome discovered when its cultural influence helped neighboring peoples develop more sophisticated social and military organizations. Third, we can appreciate how historical change often results from complex interactions rather than simple causes. Rome didn't fall because of moral decay, lead poisoning, Christianity, or any single factor. It transformed due to interconnected developments, Hunnic migration pressuring Germanic peoples, who pressured Roman frontiers, financial strains, reducing military effectiveness, political instability, undermining coordinated responses to threats, and many other factors working together in intricate feedback loops. Finally, Rome's fall reminds us of history's contingency, how differently events might have unfolded with slight changes in circumstances or decisions. What if Emperor Valens had waited for reinforcements before engaging the Goths at Adrianople? What if Stilicho hadn't been executed just before Alaric's invasion of Italy? What if the massive expedition against the Vandals in 468 had succeeded in reclaiming North Africa? The path of history is not predetermined, but shaped by countless decisions, chance events, and structural forces interacting in unpredictable ways. As we've journeyed together through this transformative period, we've seen Rome not as a static entity that simply fell, but as a dynamic civilization constantly adapting to new challenges, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. The end of the Western Roman Empire didn't mean the end of Roman influence or the onset of a dark age of complete barbarism. Rather, it marked the beginning of new cultural syntheses and political arrangements that would eventually evolve into medieval European civilization. Our imaginary garden in Ravenna, where we began tonight's reflection, perfectly symbolizes this continuity amid change. The mosaics surrounding us blend classical Roman artistic techniques with Christian subject matter under the patronage of Germanic rulers. The very buildings here, some converted from Roman structures, others newly built but incorporating Roman elements, embody the creative adaptation that characterized this transitional era. As the evening deepens and stars appear above our garden, consider how the story of Rome's transformation offers a more nuanced understanding of historical change than simplistic narratives of rise and fall. Civilizations rarely vanish completely. They evolve, their elements recombining in new patterns. Their legacies continue to influence subsequent societies in ways both obvious and subtle. Rome's greatest achievement may not have been its conquest of the Mediterranean world, but rather the cultural template it created, flexible enough to be adopted and adapted by peoples from Britain to Mesopotamia, resilient enough to survive the empire's political fragmentation. In this sense, Rome never truly fell. Its flame was passed to new torchbearers who carried it forward in different forms. As we conclude our journey through this pivotal period in human history, take with you not just the dramatic events and colorful characters we've encountered, but also a deeper appreciation for history's complexity. The fall of Rome teaches us that historical change is rarely simple, sudden, or absolute. It's a gradual process of transformation, adaptation, and continuity amid disruption. Perhaps, as you drift towards sleep, you'll dream of those ancient Romans and their barbarian neighbors, not as figures from a distant past, but as people much like ourselves, facing uncertainty, navigating change, preserving what they valued, while adapting to new realities. Their world became ours through countless small transitions, each barely perceptible in isolation, but revolutionary in their cumulative effect. And who knows, 1,000 years from now, people might look back on our time with similar curiosity, wondering how our civilization changed and what elements of it persisted through transformations we cannot yet imagine. The study of history reminds us that we, too, are part of an unfolding story, one in which the past is never entirely gone, and the present is always becoming the past for future generations. Good night, and may the wisdom of history guide your dreams